Okay, let's unpack this. If you're a parent, or, even if you just remember what it was like growing up, you know this tension, this kind of impossible choice between freedom and safety. Forever, it feels like parents get caught between these two really big goals. They often seem to pull in opposite directions. On one side, you absolutely have to try and prevent your kid from getting into serious trouble. We're talking about delinquency, substance abuse, things that can really go wrong. But on the other side, you need this atmosphere of like real trust, openness. That's crucial for their emotional development, right?
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just some philosophical thing parents puzzle over. It's actually been a huge blind spot, maybe even a failure, in a lot of the scientific models we've relied on. The thinking always seems straightforward. Okay, too much supervision, maybe you stop something bad right now, but you risk killing the trust, which ironically can lead to kids getting really good at hiding things.
Mm.
But, too little supervision. Then you're potentially exposing them to real dangers.
Yeah.
So parents felt stuck in this paradox
Hmm.
constantly.
And for a long time, the advice from researchers seemed almost, well, too simple, maybe. The gold standard was basically just monitoring. Monitor your kid. That was the message. Reduce risk by watching closely. And it felt concrete, something parents could do. And yeah, there was early research, a lot of it linking monitoring to less delinquency, less substance abuse.
Oh, absolutely. It became the standard advice. Very widespread. Monitor, monitor, monitor.
Yeah.
But the sources we're diving into today really highlight the problems with that, the deep flaws. Researchers started digging in and found that neat line more monitoring equals less risk. Well, that got really fuzzy in the real world. It wasn't linear at all. The results were, frankly, all over the place, depending on the family structure, their income, cultural background, even just the kid's personality.
Right. So what supposedly worked for one family was useless or even harmful for another. The model just couldn't flex.
Exactly. It was too rigid. And this inconsistency, this messiness in the data, led researchers to talk about a crisis of fragmentation in family science. That simple monitoring idea, it just crumbled under the weight of all this variation. It created confusion for researchers and honestly left parents totally unsure what to do. We clearly needed something more adaptable than just, a surveillance checklist.
Okay, so the simple monitor command failed. It fragmented. And maybe that explains why parents, desperate for some kind of control, sometimes swing way too far the other way. Let's talk about overparenting.
Yes, this is so important because it shows what happens when, good intentions go into overdrive. We usually call it helicopter parenting now, right? But historically, as the source material points out, the idea of overparenting was seen as pretty pathological. Back in the 40s, they linked it to things like an abnormal mother-child pathological relationship. It was seen as actively harmful to development.
Wow. Okay, so what does that look like today? What are the signs of that kind of extreme, maybe unhealthy involvement?
Well, the key is that it's excessive and crucially developmentally inappropriate. So you see parents with really high levels of anxiety about the child's safety, their future. Often they have real trouble separating, letting the child become more independent, especially in adolescence. And there's this palpable need to monitor and control everything, homework, friends, activities, you name it. Often it's driven by the parent's own anxiety, not really by what the child actually needs at that stage.
And the damage that does. It's long term, right? It's not just annoying for the kid.
Oh, absolutely. The research is pretty clear on the negative consequences. It really undermines their sense of competence. Like, if the parent always jumps in, the child never learns they can handle things. It's also linked to a higher risk for anxiety disorders later on. And this is really interesting. It impacts their locus of control.
Okay, hang on. Locus of control. Let's make sure everyone gets that. What's the difference between internal and external, and why is external bad here?
Right. So internal locus of control means you basically believe you can influence what happens in your life. If I study, I'll pass. If I work hard, I'll get ahead. External locus of control means you think outside forces, luck, fate, other people control your destiny. And in this case, the other people is the constantly intervening parent. So when the helicopter parent is always buffering, always solving problems, the child starts to believe they don't really have much agency themselves. That loss of self-efficacy is a huge developmental problem caused by too much control.
That makes total sense. Okay, so one trap is overparenting, crushing competence. The other is this broken monitoring model. But to really understand why monitoring failed, we need to break down the different types of control parents use. The research used to distinguish between two main kinds, right?
Correct. Behavioral control and psychological control. Behavioral control is basically the good kind of structure, setting rules, clear limits, routines, having expectations. This kind of structure is generally linked to positive things like doing better in school, fewer behavioral problems. It's the necessary scaffolding for growing up.
Okay, that sounds like healthy parenting. Structure, rules, but where's the line? When does that good structure turn into something damaging?
That line gets crossed when we move into psychological control. This is the manipulative stuff, trying to control the child's thoughts and feelings. We're talking about things like making them feel guilty, with just drawing affection as punishment, not letting them express disagreement, or just generally intruding on their inner emotional world. And this type of control is linked to some really bad outcomes: depression, anxiety, more hostility. And here's the kicker. It's also linked to lower behavioral control down the line.
Wait, using psychological control actually makes their behavior worse later. That seems backward.
It does, but it makes sense when you think about it. Psychological control undermines the child's ability to develop their own internal compass, their own self-regulation skills. If you're always controlling them through guilt or manipulation, they don't learn to manage themselves based on their own values or understanding. So when the external pressure is off, they might struggle more. This finding really hit hard against any model that relied on intrusive monitoring, because that often feels like psychological intrusion to a kid.
Okay, so this brings us to the moment where the old monitoring model really started to fall apart. When researchers looked inside the black box of how parents actually find things out, parental knowledge or PK.
Yes, exactly. The work by Staton and Kerr was absolutely pivotal here. They basically said, okay, how do parents actually know what's going on? And they identified three main pathways. Isolating these really blew up the simple monitoring works idea.
Let's break those three down. This seems like the core of the shift.
Okay, so first, and most importantly, as it turned out, is spontaneous child disclosure. This is the kid just telling you stuff
Right.
willingly about their day, their friends, their problems without you having to drag it out of them. Second, parental solicitation. This is the parent actively asking, where were you? Who were you with? What did you do? Prying, basically. And third, parental control in the sense of tracking or direct monitoring, checking their phone, searching their room, using tracking apps, that kind of thing.
And when they actually measured these separately, the results must have been game-changing, given what you said about the crisis.
Game-changing is right. The really shocking finding was this. Spontaneous child disclosure was, by far, the biggest contributor to parents actually knowing what was going on and preventing risks. Not the active monitoring, not the constant questions. Disclosure trumped them. In fact, disclosure often predicted how much parents knew, even if the parents weren't doing much active tracking at all.
Wow. So all those years, researchers thought monitoring was the magic ingredient, but maybe they were just measuring the result of a good relationship. Like, monitoring only worked if the kid already trusted the parent enough to tell them things anyway.
Precisely. The source material calls the old monitoring finding potentially an artifact of measurement. The parents who seemed successful at monitoring were probably just the ones who had already built the trust needed for disclosure. And worse, parents who relied too heavily on that solicitation, the constant grilling, or on heavy-handed control, they risk damaging the very relationship that gets them the best information. It's completely counterproductive.
So trying too hard to find out what's wrong actually makes it harder to find out what's wrong.
It really puts parents in a bind. All this critique, all these inconsistencies, it wasn't just noise in the data anymore, it was a full-blown theoretical crisis. How are parents supposed to keep kids safe if the very act of trying to ensure safety-intensive monitoring destroys the trust and disclosure that provides the most crucial information?
Which brings us right back to that impossible dilemma we started with. If I watch too closely, I might push them away and make them hide things more, maybe even cause anxiety or rebellion. But if I back off completely, aiming for total trust, I might miss huge red flags. Drugs, serious trouble at school, dangerous situations. What are parents supposed to do?
Well, the answer that emerged from this crisis was a shift away from thinking about the parent acting on the child unilaterally. Instead, researchers started calling for a dyadic, interactive model. The evidence is overwhelming. Parents influence kids, and kids influence parents. It's a two-way street, so any useful model has to reflect that interaction. It needs to integrate trust and structure.
So it's not about choosing between control and trust, but finding a way to have both. Structure that feels supportive, not oppressive.
Exactly. The idea is that, yes, you need structure. You might need to take active steps sometimes, like tracking temporarily, but it has to be embedded with an open communication, nonviolent dialogue. The goal shifts from mere control to building a cohesive picture where rules make sense and are ideally agreed upon or at least understood.
This feels like it connects deeply to motivation. Like,
Hmm.
how do you set rules without making the child feel totally controlled and just rebelling against them?
You've hit on a key theoretical underpinning, self-determination theory, or SDT. This theory is really central to the philosophy of vigilant care. SDT basically says that when parents impose rules in a coercive, controlling way, do it because I said so, or else, it crushes the child's intrinsic motivation and their sense of autonomy. They might comply out of fear, but they don't internalize the reason for the rule.
But we just said structure behavioral control is good. So how does a parent enforce something like, say, a curfew without it feeling coercive? How do you make it feel supportive?
It really comes down to the framing and the rationale offered. A coercive approach is just the threat. Home by 10 or you lose your phone. It's about power.
Okay. And the supportive way.
The supportive, non-coercive way still maintains the limit, but explains the why in terms of the child's well-being or shared family values. It might sound more like, look, the 10 p.m. curfew is important because honestly, you need enough sleep to function well at school, which we know you care about. And also, it gives us a chance to connect before everyone crashes. It's not about punishing you. It's about making sure you have what you need. See the difference? It frames the rule as being for the child's benefit, supporting their goals. That makes it much more likely they'll accept it, maybe even internalize it. The absolute core idea here is that parental presence should support self-determination, not crush it.
That framing acting for the child's good versus acting out of your own anxiety, that seems huge. Okay, so all this critique, the need for integration, the insights from SDT, this all sets the stage for the solution proposed in the source material. This is where we get to vigilant care.
Yes. Vigilant Care, or VC, is presented as the way to resolve this long-standing dilemma. It's defined less as a set of actions and more as a flexible attitude. It's rooted in that foundation of trust and security we've been talking about. And the key difference from old monitoring models is that VC involves focused attention and protective action only when warning signals appear. When things seem okay, the parent allows high levels of autonomy. It's not constant nagging surveillance.
So it's responsive, not preemptive surveillance.
Yeah.
That flexibility seems crucial. It lets parents dial involvement up or down without necessarily blowing up the relationship every time.
Exactly. VC offers a pathway back to openness and trust because it integrates 3 different levels of involvement. And these levels aren't fixed. The parent shifts between them based on the child's needs, their age, what's actually happening.
Okay, let's get concrete. What are these 3 levels? Starting from the baseline, the everyday default.
Level 1 is open attention. This should be the default state, kind of the home base for the relationship. Here, the parent is fundamentally non-intrusive. They're working to create that atmosphere where the child feels safe disclosing things. They're passively available, like a secure anchor the kid knows is there. And critically, they're attuned to detecting early, subtle warning signs.
How do you detect signs if you're not actively prying or tracking all the time?
It means being genuinely interested in their world, asking general questions about their mood, knowing who their friends are, maybe which teachers are giving them a hard time, showing up for their stuff. It's about observing shifts in behavior, but without jumping immediately to interrogation. The goal in open attention is really to maximize that spontaneous disclosure and build the child's confidence that they can handle small problems themselves, but you're there if needed.
Okay, so open attention is the long rope phase. What happens if the parent does pick up on something more serious? Not just a bad day, but a worrying pattern.
That's the trigger to shift to level 2. Focused attention. If genuine warning signs emerge, maybe a sudden sustained drop in grades, unexplained need for money, big changes in mood or friends that seem really negative, then the parent needs to increase their involvement. This might involve checking in more often, maybe asking more direct questions, possibly even some temporary tracking of activities. But the absolute key here is dialogue and transparency.
So focused attention isn't about just clamping down. It's about saying, okay, something seems off. Let's talk about this and figure out a plan together.
Precisely. The focus is on resolving the issue and managing any escalation through negotiation. The parent needs to be upfront. Hey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z. I'm concerned because of reason. Let's talk about what's going on, and maybe we need some temporary adjustments until things are back on track.
The goal is to legitimize the increased parental involvement. The child should understand why the rules might be tightening temporarily because specific observations warrant it. It's not arbitrary. Makes sense. And then the third level is for when things are clearly going wrong and dialogue isn't enough or isn't happening.
Right. That's protective action. This is reserved for situations where there's clear and present danger or serious misbehavior. We're talking active substance abuse, self-harm, significant delinquency like theft, Or maybe the child just completely refuses to cooperate or engage during focused attention. At this point, the parent's primary responsibility shifts to immediate safety. They need to take active steps to reduce the danger. This might mean imposing strict limits, grounding, removing privileges, seeking professional help, maybe even contacting school authorities or, in extreme cases, law enforcement. The priority becomes protection and stopping the risky behavior, even if it temporarily strains the relationship or halts disclosure.
This graded approach feels so much more practical than just monitor or trust blindly. And the source material uses a powerful metaphor to tie it all together, right? The anchor.
Yes, the anchoring function analogy is really helpful. Think of vigilant care like an anchor with a long rope attached to a boat, which is the child. The anchor is the parent, providing that safe haven, the emotional security, the acceptance, the support. That's the bedrock. The rope represents the secure base. It gives the child the confidence to explore, to move away from the harbor and learn about the world, knowing they're still connected and can return.
So the parent keeps the child connected to safety, but allows them the freedom to explore. The connection is always there.
Exactly. And the parent adjusts the length of the rope, the level of vigilance based on the conditions. Open attention is a long rope, lots of freedom. If warning signs appear, like stormy weather, the parent shortens the rope, moving to focused attention, maybe even protective action if needed, pulling the boat closer to safety. But the goal is always to eventually lengthen the rope again as the child demonstrates they can navigate safely. It's about supporting their journey to independence, not keeping them tied up forever.
Okay, these levels make theoretical sense, but let's see how they play out. The case studies and the sources really bring VC to life and also show what happens when parents get it wrong.
Yeah, the examples are great. Let's start with open attention, the default. There's a case of Clara and her 15-year-old Mira. Mira started going to parties, staying out late, and Clara realized Mira was starting to lie about where she was and what she was doing. That's a warning signal, right? Now, an old-school monitoring approach might have meant Clara immediately demanding Mira's phone, installing tracking software, grounding her indefinitely.
But under Vigilant Care, recognizing the signal doesn't automatically mean maximum crackdown. Claire chose a different first step.
Right. Clara understood the lying was a symptom of a breakdown in trust, maybe. So instead of just punishing the behavior, she focused on the relationship. She initiated an open conversation. Importantly, she didn't lead with accusations. She talked about how much she valued their honest relationship, expressed her concerns calmly, and even shared some of her own experiences and mistakes from when she was younger. The aim was to create a safe space for Mira to maybe open up about why she felt the need to lie. It kept the door open for disclosure, acknowledged the warning sign, but didn't immediately escalate to heavy control. It also set the stage. If the lying continued, Clara moving to focused attention would feel more justified.
That makes sense. It preserves the relationship while addressing the concern. Okay, moving up the scale. Focus attention. This is when dialogue continues, but structure increases. The example of Gabriel and his father, Maurice.
Yeah, Gabriel was 17, and after his parents separated, he started really acting out, staying out super late, not calling, basically cutting off communication with his dad, Maurice. Maurice saw this pattern. It wasn't a one-off. It was consistent neglect of their agreements and communication, clear signals needing a shift to focused attention. So Maurice insisted they talk. But critically, he framed it as a structured conversation, not an angry interrogation. He consciously avoided blaming language.
And how did he make sure it felt collaborative, not just like laying down the law, that SDT principle?
Good point. He actually brought in Gabriel's uncle, James, who Gabriel trusted and had a good relationship with. Using James as a kind of mediator helped take some of the direct parent-child conflict out of it. And together, the three of them negotiated new rules. Gabriel agreed to check in, let his dad know his plans and when he expected to be back. And Maurice, in return, promised not to give him the third degree about his personal life unless those basic safety agreements were broken. That negotiation worked. Things stabilized because the increased vigilance felt legitimate. It was transparent, discussed, and involved mutual commitments. It tightened the rope but reinforced the anchor of trust.
Okay, and then the highest level of protective action, when negotiation fails or the danger is immediate.
The case of Shirley and 11-year-old Eva is a stark example. Eva wasn't just bending rules. She was lying about where she was going and stealing money from her mom's purse. That's clear delinquency. It crosses a serious line. Shirley didn't hesitate. She moved straight to protective action. There wasn't really room for extended dialogue at that moment. She confirmed the theft and the lying, went and got her daughter from where she wasn't supposed to be, and imposed immediate firm consequences and boundaries. Protection became the absolute priority over trying to maintain dialogue or preserve autonomy in that instant.
And the VC model gives parents like Shirley the framework to know that escalating like that is sometimes the necessary and correct step. They don't have to feel guilty for not trying endless dialogue when this situation clearly warrants action.
Exactly. It validates that sometimes you have to shorten that rope drastically for safety, knowing that the other levels are there to return to once the immediate crisis is managed.
Now, just as important as seeing VC work is seeing why the old ways fail. The source material gives some really painful examples of good intentions leading to bad outcomes. Let's talk about Virginia and Julia, the case of unconditional trust gone wrong.
Right. Virginia really believed in this idea of total unconditional trust. Her daughter, Julia, was 14 and had been caught stealing money from her mother multiple times. Big warning signs. But Virginia felt that if she just kept trusting Julia blindly, didn't increase oversight, Julia would somehow magically learn self-control. Julia would promise to change, and Virginia would back off completely.
And predictably, ignoring clear, repeated warning signs.
Led to exactly what you'd expect. Julia stole again. And Virginia was devastated, felt utterly betrayed. The VC perspective here is pretty blunt. Unconditional trust isn't a parenting strategy when serious risks or repeated negative behaviors are evident. Parents have a responsibility to provide structure and limits, especially when the child consistently shows they can't manage on their own yet. Trust needs to be reciprocal and rebuilt, not just handed out despite evidence it's being broken.
Okay, then there's the flip side. Not blind trust, but pure suspicion leading to the spying trap. The case of George and Alice. This feels very relevant today.
Extremely relevant. George was a widower, really worried his 17-year-old daughter Alice might be smoking pot or doing other drugs, but instead of trying to talk to her, maybe using focused attention, he went straight to secret surveillance. He snooped in her bag, found some marijuana. Okay, warning sign confirmed. But then, instead of confronting her openly, he doubled down on the deceit. He called the police behind her back and tried to use that as leverage, all while hiding how he found out.
That's just, wow, textbook way to destroy any remaining trust.
Completely. Spying obliterates legitimacy. When Alice eventually found out about the snooping and the secret police involvement, their relationship was ruined. George's fear drove him to actions that made it impossible for him to actually help Alice later. She just learned to hide things better. VC warns strongly against this. That kind of anxious spying comes from the parent's fear, not the child's needs, and it usually backfires, making real intervention harder.
And one more trap, which feels very modern. The privacy reflex. Sid and Venus.
Yeah, Sid really valued his 12-year-old daughter Venus's privacy. He felt her computer was her space, off limits. Which sounds good, right? Respecting boundaries. But then he accidentally discovered she was involved in some really risky stuff online, looking at inappropriate sites, talking to sketchy, anonymous people online, clear danger signals. But Sid froze. He hesitated to intervene because he was so caught up in respecting her privacy. That reflex paralyzed him, even when faced with obvious harm.
The need for protection had to trump the abstract ideal of privacy at that point.
Absolutely. The VC principle is clear. As soon as there is a credible threat to the child's safety or well-being, whether it's online danger, substance abuse, serious lies, the value of privacy have to take a back seat to the duty to protect. Sid did eventually act, thankfully, but that hesitation allowed the risk to continue longer than it should have.
So when you look at all this, the real strength of Vigilant Care seems to be its ability to integrate all these findings. It offers a way forward from that fragmented mess we talked about earlier.
It really does. It provides heuristic value, meaning it helps us think about parenting in a new, more useful way. It guides parents away from excessive, potentially harmful control and towards involvement that's actually effective because it's tailored and respects the relationship. It emphasizes creating that baseline of open attention where disclosure can happen naturally and then gives clear guidelines for escalating involvement only when needed and in a way that aims to preserve trust.
And the ultimate goal isn't lifelong parental surveillance, right? It's about building the child's own capacity.
Exactly. The final stage, the ideal outcome of Vigilant Care, is that the parent's watchful presence becomes internalized by the young person. They develop their own self-monitoring, their own self-care, their own ability to make good choices. The parent shifts from being the external regulator to being the facilitator of the child's own developing autonomy. The rope is gradually, permanently loosened because the child has learned to navigate safely on their own.
So what does this all mean? For you, listening, as you think about these ideas, Vigilant Care isn't some rigid rule book. It's more like, well, a dance. A constant adjustment between providing structure and allowing freedom, between checking in and trusting, always responding to the signals your child is sending. But here's something to chew on, a final thought. This model, Vigilant Care, hinges on escalating vigilance based on observed warning signals. You move from open attention to focused or protective action because the child's behavior triggers it. Yet, think about today. We live in a world overflowing with tech that allows for constant, cheap, easy surveillance. GPS tracking on phones, monitoring apps, checking social media. Parents now have the capacity for total surveillance 24/7, whether there's a warning sign or not. How does that core VC principle only escalate based on need, maintain open attention as the default survive in a world where the temptation and the tools for constant tracking are always right there in your pocket? Doesn't that technology make it incredibly easy to slip into that spying trap, even with good intentions, undermining the very trust VC is built on? That's a really tricky modern challenge to navigate.
Mm.
Something to think about.